You are listening to the Propane podcast, and here we are today with a man after my own heart. We are with Michael Kirk, an industrial engineer, and this is a man who I came across on his website called Efficiency is Everything. And I basically weed myself when I saw his mention of a shoehorn and how many number of hours that it saves over the year, because if you have been listening to us for a while, you'll know that I am a massive fan of the shoehorn. I have a luxury shoehorn right here that was a gift for my birthday, and it's probably the best gift that I've ever received. So what Michael does is he applies the principles of industrial engineering to life overall, and just his approach to this is really unique, and I think there's a lot to be learned from both your fitness perspective and also from your business. Michael, hello, thanks for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So, Michael, can you tell us a bit about yourself, what you do as kind of a day job, and then we can go into some of the nitty-gritty.
Like you mentioned, I run Efficiency is Everything. That's kind of my night project. My day job, if you want to take away any sort of efficiency, it's a really high-paying engineering job. I picked the highest-paying one, and that's actually in electrical engineering. And if there's any takeaway there, maximize your revenue. Kind of by any means necessary. And I'm a big fan of following the winds of economics. Economics is pushing me towards, whatever pays the most. So that's kind of my day job. I got my master's in industrial engineering, and kind of what ended up inspiring Efficiency is Everything. I did this process called 5S, and that's basically the engineering, I think the Japanese way of sorting things. So it just is kind of a process to cleaning up something. So anyway, I did this to our cabinet at home, and my wife is like, "This is great. Like, do you have any more of these ideas?" So I started doing a bunch of this industrial engineering to our life at home, everything from our groceries. I ended up writing down every single recipe we had, and then getting the ingredients we needed to and putting them by grocery aisle. And this was just very beneficial. Those kind of things, it made life easier. So it was very easy for my wife to actually enjoy this. So then at one point she's like, "You got to show other people this." So by the way, if you want those recipes, you can get them on the website for free.
Ah, cool. Yeah, so we'll stick all the links for this in the description on the comments. There's so much in there already. It sounds like your career choice was a strategic move to say, how can I maximize my hourly rate relative to the inputs, and what are the market forces telling me that I should go into? So that's really cool. And then also the thing about splitting your recipes by grocery aisle, minimizing the amount of zigzagging around the grocery shop. This is something that, so I wrote a piece a while ago on a kind of similar vein on semi-automating your diet. And this is about taking the, so you first split the food groups that you require based on your goal. So muscle gain or fat loss. You look at the number of carbs, protein, and fat that you require. And also, within those foods, generally carbs are very non-perishable, and protein tends to be the most perishable type of food. So you then split the batch ordering or the bulk ordering of the perishable foods on a more frequent basis, and then the non-perishable foods on a less frequent basis, such that you have a automated grocery shop that triggers every month, let's say, online, with the approximate amount that you would consume for the non-perishable foods, and then you have a more frequent one, say weekly or every 10 days for the perishable foods, and then you can basically eat for £7 a day or about $10 without having to think about the kind of foods that you're eating. So it sounds like we're thinking on the same vein there in terms of drilling things down to the parameters that you would need to set up your diet, or in your case your career as well.
Yeah. I want to comment on your ordering process. So there's kind of just mentioning there's two ways of thinking. There's that buying in bulk, and then another thing I've been taught is they call it just in time. So it's just in time, say logistics, and the idea is you only buy what you need, I guess as often as you need it, and this reduces chance. And you were talking about perishables, reduced chance of spoiling. Hopefully when you have your bulk, you know how much you're going to use. But just another way of thinking. It saves space when you do just in time. We buy our groceries once a week. And I'm kind of curious, so you currently do this?
So I currently do this. I've actually gone one step further, which is maybe not what a lot of people would agree with, but this is just for currently I'm optimizing just for absolute time rather than price or anything else, because time is my current bottleneck. And so I'm just eating ready meals. And because these meals are so freezable and you can just microwave them at any point, it means that if I skip a meal, or if I end up having a meal out or something, I don't end up then just fucking up my whole process, because they're freezable and they last for months. So for me, it kind of avoids the just-in-time, some of the pitfalls of the just-in-time process, as long as you have enough freezer space. But I think like freezers and microwaves have just been a complete revolution for me, and I don't even have an oven anymore in my house, just because it's not something that fits my workflow anymore.
Yeah. No, we pretty much cook on the stovetop, so I see that.
Cool. So there was an article on your website called "The 7 Forms of Waste," and I think this kind of underpins a lot of the other processes that you talk about. And it seems like the way that you apply the industrial engineering tends to be like avoiding some of these forms of waste. Can you talk us through those?
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing is looking at a lot of your problems you deal with on a daily basis or weekly basis, pretty much anything that you want to make more efficient. The goal is to really drive that down to a process. And I'll just kind of describe how I picture a process. If you could list out every single step it takes from start to completion, and you get rid of the non-value added ones, things like walking around don't really create value. But say, the example I give is, say you're trying to get ready in the morning very quickly. What do you actually need to get done? And a lot of it will be like showering. You got to get clean. But you don't need to wait for the water to get hot. You could be potentially doing things in this time. So I think as far as, so here's something to practice. I would say, look at your morning routine. If you're really ambitious, write down every single step, because when you write down every single step, you'll start realizing the waste. You can actually visualize the waste. An alternative to this, just go through your morning routine, see where you're waiting around. That would be one way of, or even walking back and forth. Those are all things that don't create value. So I'll kind of go into those 7 forms of waste. It might help visualize what those could be. So I mentioned transportation. You look at your morning routine, you might be moving clothes from room to room. You might end up walking back and forth from room to room because you forgot something. Those kind of things you could even potentially error-proof. So going through the 7 forms, so transportation, that's one of them. Inventory, so when you have lots of, say, items, say you have tons of clothes, it may be harder to make a decision on what you're going to grab. Motion, this is actually like the sort of small movements. Say you're taking a shower and you wash your hair, and then you let the soap drain down you. I would say that's very efficient compared to if you wash, say, your body and then you washed your hair. That might not be a great example, but that's kind of an idea of what motion would be. Waiting, that kind of exactly what it sounds like. If you're waiting for the shower to heat up, if you're waiting on someone else. What I like to do with my waiting time, everyone pulls out their phone, so I don't think waiting is that big of a deal anymore. So over-processing, the way I want to describe this form of waste, it's trying too hard. So imagine you really don't need to doll yourself up that much to get to work and get paid. Maybe it's worth not trying too hard. Or the other example I have, imagine you cook like this really fancy dinner. Did you really need the fancy dinner that took you an hour and a half to make, or could you have gotten away with cooking in 15 minutes?
So the over-processing thing, just to add to that, I think the example you gave on the website was, let's say you're cooking a fancy dinner for some guests, and you don't know that the guest's level of threshold or tolerance for a fancy meal is actually like 80% less than the amount of effort that you've put in. And so all the extra hour and a half of time that you've spent cooking a meal doesn't impact their enjoyment of the meal. And so you were saying, like, actually this is over-processing something that doesn't provide any marginal return, but has a massive marginal cost. And right. So I guess it's about finding that point where there are decreasing or negative or decreasing or negative marginal returns on your input. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and I guess there's not always a way to determine without like really studying like what you actually need. Anything can be really broken down into numbers, at least in my opinion. But yeah, do what you need to do, and maybe we should talk about Pareto at some point. Doing what is it? 20% of the work gives you 80% of the results. Just kind of that mentality. I'll go through the last two. Overproduction, maybe this one's harder to visualize. The way I like, say you bulk prep food, but then you get sick of the food or it expires. But that one maybe not as common. And then defects, think about making a mistake. Say you forgot to, here's one. I'll leave my bedroom and I'll be walking outside and then only to remember I need to put my belt on. So a defect in your morning routine is that maybe I left the room without double checking everything. And checklists are really good for that. You're sort of jumping around, but the checklist idea, if you do not use checklists already, this will fix any problems you run into forgetting things. I put one on my door, and since then I haven't forgotten my lunch or my work badge, which were two huge things for me.
So there's probably two benefits to a checklist. One is not forgetting anything, and obviously it's used in the medical industry and the airline industry, like as part of their standard protocol because of the potential massive safety cost if something is forgotten, in a surgical theatre or in a plane takeoff. But the other thing is probably the time saving as well, because if you're like the switching time between like doing 80% of the checklist and then being like, oh, hang on, I haven't done this bit, or oh wait, I need to go back and get like all of that switching or the mental resource required to be like, oh, I need to also do this, which I may have forgotten or may not have. Or like I'm sure everyone's like made lunch, left it on the counter, headed out of the house, and then they're 5 minutes down the road and they're like, bollocks, I forgot my lunch. So they go back and have, all of that stuff gets saved by having a checklist too. So I think those 7 forms of waste, the way that you've described those, like with such kind of real world examples, is probably already making people think like this is stuff that I've probably got hundreds of these inefficiencies throughout the day that I'm not thinking of. Now, the reaction there is either, how do I get a handle on all of this? Or, how does this really matter at all? And I suppose we can cover the philosophical, like, why does this matter in a second. But for the stuff of, how do I know that I've got a handle on it all? You've actually got a full worked example of a morning routine where you talk about the kind of coffee, shower, brushing your teeth process that you described there. And actually, when you put it down on paper and you talk about which of these steps is value adding and which of these is not value adding, which ones are done in serial, which ones can be done in parallel, you actually start to realize like there is so much slack in the system. And if you can optimize that stuff, it seems just pretty incredible. So with the showering stuff, you've got like, you split it down into really the micro steps of like, wake up, get out of bed, get the towel, take clothes off, run the shower, get toothpaste on the toothbrush, like all these things. And you're like, actually, there's loads of these little steps that can be fit together, and some that require a waiting time. And as you said, like the waiting time, it almost becomes unnoticed because people by default they get their phone out and they'll start like texting or checking the news feed. But that's not a good use of time either. That's just adding dead time into your day as well.
Kind of giving an example of how these kind of seconds can add up. So say, I'll give the example of, say you need to throw something away 4 times a day, or how about 2 times a day? You have to walk over to the trash can. Say it takes you 5 seconds to walk over to your trash can, throw something away, then 5 seconds to walk back to what you were doing. You do that twice a day. So over the course of your lifetime, that'll take you 100 hours. So it might seem like it's only 5 seconds, but when that ends up adding up, that'll be literally hours you're spending just walking back and forth to that trash can.
So sickening.
The takeaway there is, move the trash can closer to you when you're working on whatever this is. So a very simple, almost obvious thing. But once you call it out, it's much easier to recognize sort of the waste around your life, and it really does add up. I don't know. I guess I feel like I have a pretty easygoing life, but I get stuff done as well.
So people take the piss out of me for this, for being so obsessed with the shoehorn.
Oh.
And I feel like you are one of the only men that truly understands this. And it's exactly what you just described. That is like, if you're spending like however many 100 hours in your life putting a shoe on, like, and that's unnecessarily wasted time. I guess the only way to truly appreciate how much of a waste of this precious short life that we have of that is if you, let's say, our lives weren't working as they were right now, but instead you had like all of your activities that you spend throughout your life, and they suddenly get alphabetized and done in batch. So then, like, you're born, and the first 100 hours of your 70-year life is spent putting on shoes, and then the second 100 hours are spent walking back and forth to the bin, and then the third 100 like, you would then look at that and be like, whoa, hang on, this is a lot of time that is boring, unpleasant, and unnecessary.
By the way, I find that a very interesting way to visualize it. Very often I'll do it in just numbers, but hearing kind of, if you could live like that, have to spend 100 hours just putting your shoes on all back to back.
You'd go insane.
By the way, I wanted to say, so you save, say it takes you 33 seconds to tie a pair of shoes. With a shoehorn, we found it took about 15 seconds. So you save about double that time. So I very much applaud that.
So the way that I kind of, I wrote a post about this a while ago, is that it was before I saw your thing, and it's interesting because we both come at it from a slightly different way, but actually, like, yeah, so there's the time saved multiplied by the number of times that you put the shoes on throughout the day, multiplied by the number of days in a year, and then that is the number of like salaried man hours that you're wasting, plus the skin on your thumb that you're scraping every time that you try and put on a shoe by hand, and that's like one small example of one of the 7 forms of waste that you've just described.
Only other thing I could say about the shoes is if you go, I don't know how I could really do this, but slip-ons being twice as efficient as the shoehorn.
So I think we've probably split people down the middle here. That there'll be some people that, right, they've already ordered a shoehorn on Amazon while listening to this, and the other group are probably thinking like, these two guys are over-optimizing for something that doesn't need to be done, and they're weird. Can you explain, okay, can we talk through some of the philosophical points of this, so I mean, I guess we've covered the total number of man hours wasted, but I think the flip side of that is time that, if it's saved, could be opened up to be doing something that is more fulfilling.
Right. I would say more fulfilling can be anything from spending more time with the family. I like just sleeping or laying in my bed longer. That's kind of one of the, so if I had my 15-minute morning routine and I got that down to 6 minutes. So what did I end up doing with that time? I just set my alarm later. So that means I can, I set a morning alarm and then kind of the emergency alarm. And kind of during that time I can, sometimes we have the kid in the room. So just that extra time, sometimes we'll wake up early, I'll read a book to him. So, like, it might not seem like, minutes matter, but when you can finish a page of a book in a minute, that'll actually add up over the course of the year. I mean, I've read hundreds of pages now of books in the morning. So I can give some credit there.
So your morning routine is 6 minutes?
Yeah, so the actual part where I'm getting dressed and ready, that'll take me 6 minutes. The amount of time I spend in bed, well, that's a different story.
That's a testimonial in itself. But, like, everyone wants to spend more time in bed, and I imagine you're more relaxed as a result. And people, like, statistically are so chronically sleep deprived that being able to squeeze out more of that without sacrificing your output throughout the day, well, if anything, improving your output because you've slept better and you're performing better, is a huge one.
So I'll mention we do biphasic sleep. So unfortunately, this isn't engineering, and I usually pride the website in that it really sticks to data. But biphasic sleep saves so much time that I've enacted it. So it's a set of polyphasic sleep. You sleep 6 hours at night, and then you take a 20-minute nap sometime during the day. Try to take it around the same time. So I'll sleep from midnight till 6 a.m., and then I'll take a 20-minute nap whenever I get home from work, and that's usually around like 4 or 5 p.m. And I've been doing this for 4 years. My wife's been doing it with me for 4 years. We even had a kid, and she pretty much kept doing it. So I highly recommend it. So it saves 12 hours a week. So you can almost imagine how much more you get done if you had an extra almost 2 hours a night that you could spend doing whatever.
That is absolutely huge. And so when you switch, because Johnny and I tried biphasic sleeping, and I don't think we stuck with it long enough to adapt fully and to get into the flow of it. So we didn't really stick with it. But I'm so interested to hear.
How long did it take you, or how long did you try it?
Probably 2 weeks.
Okay, I was gonna say the first 3 weeks were pretty rough. And I think even week 3, I was about to give up. But then work was just so busy that it was almost a necessity. If I didn't take the nap, I was going to basically go to bed when I got home. So it ended up kind of forcing me to wait the 3 weeks. And then after 3 weeks, it kind of just clicked. So, if you ever give it another try.
So I guess you've got the extra 2 hours in the day now. Any differences in how tired you feel or how recovered you are or anything like that?
I've come to such it's a normal state. I think the things that really affect my amount of energy I have is like coffee, and if I'm working out. When I'm in good workout routines, I feel like I have infinity energy. So I can't really complain about the sleep, reducing that. I will say there are times that I'm sick or hungover or sometimes I just feel like I need to sleep more, and I just do. I don't feel too bad about it because you're already saving 12 hours a week. If you sleep for an extra, 2 to 4 hours a week, you still saved a bunch of time.
It's still a net saving of time.
The way I consider just feeding the body. If I feel like I'm sore or something, I'll sleep extra.
Okay. So, Michael, it sounds like you are a man who's got his priorities in order, in the sense that you're like, I've optimized my job to enable me to get the most money per hour, and therefore spend the most time with family, spend time doing things I enjoy, more time in bed. And so in your case, like, the philosophical prioritization side of it has kind of been covered for you. But one of the most common criticisms that I hear, particularly for the things that I do on a micro optimization level, so things like Alfred for Mac, I'm obsessed with. I don't know if this is a bit of software that you use. It's like
I don't.
Oh, okay. So it's like a it's a program bar launcher that's kind of like a command line thing, that you can do a lot of tasks that would require multiple steps with 2 or 3 key presses. So it's both keyboard shortcuts and short commands that you can type, and I use it, I think, about 350 times a day on average, because it gives you some analytics. Saved me a huge amount of time. But saying that, and the fact that I'm so enthusiastic about it, some people are saying, well, is it just making you do the wrong things faster? And I guess this is something that needs to be addressed for all of these minor optimizations, which is, are we then just working more efficiently but not more effectively, or not moving further towards our kind of larger scale goals?
Right.
To me, it seems like they're 2 separate disciplines, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, and I think it should be treated as 2 separate disciplines, because there's always this ability to, say, innovate or eliminate a task. I mean, eliminating a task is better than making a task more efficient. So total agreement on that. That is like the best way. I would say this is maybe all part of the same industrial engineering. Say something is non-value added. You were talking about doing the wrong thing. Maybe it's best to go through what your problems are and maybe write it down and root cause why you're doing that. A tool maybe to give you an idea on how to look at those things. If you ask the question why you're doing something or why something exists, you get an answer. So why do we eat food? We need nutrition. Why do we need nutrition? Because if we don't, we're going to feel terrible. Well, maybe this isn't that great, because in the end, you're going to need nutrition. You might get to this circle. But really looking at why you do something may help innovate. So I would say innovating, maybe that's a lot harder. That could take more time, still might have some problems. I guess that's one way to do that. But elimination of things, I would say that's all part of efficiency as well.
Right. Okay. So actually, then it's a more fundamental thing that before starting to make any process more efficient, the first question should be: is this process necessary in my workflow? Will
All
it
right.
bring me towards my greater goal?
I like that. Yep.
Cool. Yeah. And so it's interesting to hear you say that it's like you should first be looking at whether I should say no to a task at all before looking to do it better.
Yeah. What value does that task provide? And then if you find it does provide value, then can you uh, maybe get more value per either time or per dollar that you spend on it?
So what's the best way to when you write out a process? Because for example, with the morning routine thing that you wrote out, it's so much more thorough than I would have thought to, expand out every step like that and look at the process from a real bird's eye view. Is there a way that you approach any system or process to do this?
Yeah, writing down every single step is a real way that they look at these. And sure, when you're at an industrial engineering, so the closest thing I had to this, I worked in a plant, and we would have these squares, and the squares would be at each task, and then you make an arrow that points to what it does next. Because in the plant, there'll be multiple people doing multiple things. But in the end, even just writing everything down when you're doing something, another tool they use, they'll use like a camera, and they'll just visually record. So then when you're all done doing the process, you can write down all the steps, or have a partner write down all the steps, because you might forget, you might not even realize you're doing something, but a partner will realize, oh, you know, stepped backwards and you walked around the bathroom for a minute.
Okay.
So writing down the process, and then the next thing is measuring the process. So if you want to get real nitty gritty, you can time. And they call this a time study. And with the time study, you can find out really what matters. Maybe you only spend 5 seconds looking for clothes, so it doesn't really matter. Maybe you spend 3 minutes looking for clothes. So instead of spending a bunch of time moving stuff around your house, maybe come up with a better process for selecting clothes. So once you have, say, the times written down, things are considered, it's repeatable. So things are repeatable. They're considered in control. Because you could theoretically graph all of this, and that's what they do in the plant. They graph all of this, and as long as the times are steady, they're in control. And then you can really make some process improvements that are measurable. So that's kind of the more nitty-gritty, how they engineer sort of a process optimization.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So you're looking at the whole process, what each step takes in terms of time, and how that affects the overall output, and seeing at what point these can either be overlapped or eliminated. We have a large audience that are PTs or online coaches, so either looking to move online or currently are working online, maybe coaching 15, 20, 30 clients, and are finding that they're not able to take on more clients without just cutting out more time from their day or sleeping an hour less. And we were absolutely in this position as well. So there is certainly a case of time optimization, and some of the ways that we addressed that was realizing, exactly as that kind of analysis pointed out, that you're maybe writing out a training program for a client who is 30-year-old male, overweight, looking to lose weight, and vegetarian. And so you write out a program, and then you have the next client, which is 25-year-old female looking to gain muscle. So you write out a program there, and then next time you have something that's a similar demographic but slightly different, and you write a whole new program from scratch. And maybe on that day you're feeling a bit forgetful, or you've had something going on that day that's made you a bit distracted, and so you miss out a couple of the key details or whatever. And so each time the quality control is completely off, and it takes you so long to write a program each time and to deliver that and answer individual questions, each like repeated questions that you're doing over and over again. So applying the process that you've described, I guess it's looking at what are the things that I do repeatedly that not only am I doing badly because of poor quality control, tiredness, sleep deprivation, being busy that day, but also what can I do to standardize the process to make the client experience as good as it can be. And I suppose that's similar to an industrial process, but it's just with a human at the other end of it. So for us, we just created a gold standard template that we then used to adapt for new clients. And same with FAQs and questions. And if we were getting questions that were common, we would put them into a question bank and create the gold standard answer for that, and create either autoresponders that dealt with the questions or included it within the core materials that the client would receive. So have you got any thoughts on how to optimize that for that kind of audience as well?
Yeah, I'll share some thoughts on that. I also want to applaud you for saying the word quality. It might sound like a buzzword, but quality is sometimes measurable. I guess if you could measure it, is a good measurable metric, maybe for satisfaction, even something to determine what is the bare minimum. What is the bare minimum quality you're allowed? In engineering, you optimize for all of that. You don't want to, we were talking kind of about over-processing. You don't want to spend too much effort on something that, say, doesn't need it as much. And sure, you want things to be, say, the highest quality, but maybe some things don't matter. Maybe, I mentioned earlier your appearance. Maybe your appearance doesn't matter. Maybe you don't have to spend as long on it. But I think that's interesting to think about. There's some human things that make it difficult. Imagine you schedule someone shows up 15 minutes late. My wife has this problem with her practice. People will cancel. I would say for a successful visit, there's probably one process you can follow. Optimizing maybe which machines, or not that I use machines, but whatever you're training on. Maybe you have a good process to make that go quicker. You have a set wait time between sets or something that you follow to the tooth, and you minimize something like a wait time. If you absolutely need to wait a few minutes between your set, that's one story. But if they don't, then you don't make more money by letting them just sit around. So maybe that's something to look at. But all of this can be measured. Maybe it's best to do it with like a friend that is okay with you measuring this on them rather than like a client. But then you can kind of find where you're putting a lot of your time and making sure, say you find out 50% of your time is value added where people are working out, and then half the time isn't. Can you do anything with that time? And then say a client cancels, maybe having a plan for when a client cancels. What are you going to do with your time if a client cancels? Because I'll tell you that, say I have a meeting or something and someone cancels, I didn't have plans for that hour, and I could waste that, like we were talking about, waste it on your phone if you're not kind of careful. So having a fallback, having a process in place for when that happens.
That makes sense. So I guess the main points there are having a contingency for when things don't go to plan, and making sure that if a client doesn't turn up, or if a client's late on, for example, we respond to fitness and business clients on a Friday when they report in, but if they're late, then that changes our workflow, and it means that the time that we've allocated for them on the Friday has been lost. Or so we then need to have a contingency plan that if we don't receive a report for them, we send them a reminder, but we have something to do during that time so that it's not wasted time. So there's a contingency element. You've then talked about KPIs, or having some kind of metric that you're using to say, is this process successful and is it profitable? And then also being able to identify which of the steps in either the product delivery or the marketing are the value adding steps, and which brings a client into, which brings, for example, a lead into a client, or a client into a retained long-term client.
Yeah, what provides the satisfaction? Obviously, everyone wants results. Maybe people just want to feel good when they leave. And spending a few minutes just chatting with someone maybe makes a bigger difference than doing an extra set.
That's so interesting. Okay, so I guess being able to, I guess, either on a human level, or if it's online, and if it's at scale, being able to capture that in your process with maybe a feedback form, or being able to get some analytics from your users that says what is the key thing that has caused them to subscribe or to stay with you or to return or to book a session or whatever, and then figuring out how can I maximize that metric.
So not to go full skeptic on that, but I bet you there's some psychology about how people will not answer truthfully. They kind of have their own ideas, what they think is wrong, but they don't really share. So there's even a little bit of skepticism when you add a human element to that. So, but you do the best you can with the data you have available.
So do you think it's better to, let's say you're working with a client and they, like, do you think it's better to just basically chat to them and try and get a more global idea of what it is that's caused them to stay with you, rather than filtering it down to kind of something a bit more quantified?
I would say take lots of data. Take a survey, talk to a person. You can even kind of read body language, read between the lines when someone will send me an email, and I can tell, like, I've had people tell me, I usually don't email people, which makes me think a lot of my users maybe don't reach out to people who run websites. So I don't feel too bad if I send an email and I don't get feedback. That was something where I thought, oh, maybe I offended this person. Well, probably it's just, some of my audience doesn't like replying to emails or doesn't want to communicate or something. And something like that, you can't necessarily just get off of a survey, because the people that answer the survey are a different type of person that that you could be corresponding with. So I think you can use process on a lot of things, but I definitely think that the human element of things is an area for variability.
So that is interesting in itself, that you've got people who wouldn't normally reach out to someone, they wouldn't normally send an email, and yet there's a different type of person that would fill in a survey or that would engage with an advert or something. And we've certainly found that with marketing, that when you have a Facebook advert, you will get high engagement from a certain demographic of audience, but actually that demographic may not be the ones that would buy. They're just the ones that are more likely to comment on a post. But the ones who buy could even be total lurkers. They could be really silent online. They don't like posts in general. They're not in the habit of being vocal online, but they just quietly buy stuff. And it's quite hard to then access those people, besides having genuine content that resonates with your audience enough for them to physically reach out to you. As you said, that they'll send you an email and be like, hey, I don't normally do this, but here's this. So that's such an interesting point about when, with your marketing or with your survey data, to be aware that there will be a degree of sample selection, sample bias within that itself, before anyone even starts the response.
Yeah, I guess my big takeaway there is respect the human element of things. And then anything that's not human, then I'd like to just put process to and make efficient as can be.
So one of my concerns before speaking to you was, like, seeing the way that you split these things out. I thought, this man is so metric based that actually he's going to be ignoring the human element of it, and actually approaching a human or a service oriented business with an overly metric based quantitative approach can end up either being a bit kind of it just misses out on a lot of the elements of it. But it sounds like you're saying respect that element, and then anything that can't be captured like that, that's when you revert to the data. And the same thing with realizing what processes need to be done overall, having everything framed by the bigger goal of what do I want out of my process, or what do I want out of my business. And this is definitely something that we made as a mistake when we started Propane, which was, we were thinking, okay, well, we want to grow. Didn't really have any specific metrics there, any KPIs. So we ended up just taking on more clients, eventually like dropping our price to the point where it was absolutely loss making compared to if we were to spend the same number of hours just working in a Starbucks. But we didn't think about that. We just thought, oh, how do we increase revenue? We're trying to increase revenue. Whereas looking back, that revenue per man hours was the key metric there, because anyone can increase their revenue and at the same time their costs can go way up, and those costs can be in time, energy, or money. And so I think realizing, or if you're going to optimize for a metric, to make sure that that is definitely the right one. And if you were to extrapolate and say, what if this were to be at its maximum, then what would happen to my life is really important.
I do have to comment. I love that that way of thinking. Being able to make a decision off the math will validate an idea. I had one of my wife's friends over, and she was thinking about starting a yoga studio. And pretty much whenever someone tells me their business idea, I whip out Excel and I calculate to see if it's viable. And she was one of the first people that when I did her numbers, I was like, oh, you totally could make money doing this. And I can't remember how much I calculated she'd make. I think like 60 grand a year would be like her salary. And, you know, there's some crude numbers there. But the fact that she was profitable, giving me the numbers she was expecting, you know, that's a good sign. And I guess the best way to describe that is, like, I guess that's rational decision making, like using math to determine, you were talking about revenue per man hour, seeing if things are viable. And yeah, just whipping out Excel or Google Sheets and, you know, spending the 10 minutes to an hour putting all your numbers down and finding if something's going to work. I do that for everything from health insurance to food. Just trying to, you know, make a good decision on what I'm going to buy.
Huge return on investment, just spending those 10 minutes on Excel and figuring out, is there a return on this? So it looks like...
You're wasting money.
Yeah. Like, well, it looks like we've kind of applied these principles to personal life, personal productivity, business, so both with marketing, lead generation, and service delivery, and also something that you kind of just started touching on, which is personal finance. And so not only is a business viable, but is a job viable, or is a something worth your time to either do yourself or to pay someone to do. And this is something we tell a lot of the people who are PTs wanting to build out an online presence or build out a website. Like, don't try and learn web design yourself, because it's such a separate skill that has no overlap with being a personal trainer, that it's going to take so much time away from doing your core activity, and you'll end up doing it worse than if you just pay a guy to make a website for you, or even better, just use one of the thousands of standard templates that you can get online. Like, there's so many now that no one's going to look at it and be like, oh, that's copied from this, because there's an abundance of web templates available. And so with that in mind, like, for example, right now I've got someone cleaning my house. I've left the door open and I've just said, guys, let yourself in, clean the house, because I know that I would take longer and I would do a worse job of cleaning my house than if I pay someone else to do it. And I'm a doctor. I'm not a good cleaner. You know, I'm an okay doctor, but I'm a terrible cleaner. So it's not where my skill set lies, and it's not where I would add the most value in doing.
I have a take on this. So I see where you're coming from, because saving that time means you can put that time into other things. I also have a contrary thought. So, you know, I say this as someone who has a full-time job. Well, I'm not necessarily allowed to work more than 40 hours a week. So it's not that I could, say, work a 41st hour, get paid a bunch of money, and then use that to pay for, I'm going to just use your example, clean the house. I can't pay someone an extra, whatever that extra hour was. So I have my set income, and then I have my, I'd say, like, bare minimum expenses, and then anything in between that is finite. There's only, you know, so much money, 40% of my income. So then you have to decide what you're going to spend that on. You can spend it on, like you're doing, saving time, or maybe you want to spend it on your mortgage so you don't have to pay so much interest every month. But all different kind of ideas. Maybe the best thing to do is calculate for your life what's the best thing to take your money and spend it on.
Oh, I 100% agree with that. And I don't think it's necessarily at odds with the idea of outsourcing things, but I think you're right. You need to have the clarity of, like, is this a worthwhile investment? Like, is the hourly rate that I'm paying the cleaner better than the hourly rate that I would earn myself, or that I could, fudge with enjoyment differences, or how quickly I could clean the house relative to them, and so on. And there's a really interesting framework that I saw a while ago from, I can't remember where it was a personal finance thing, and they were talking about calculating first your true salary, which is not the gross salary, not the net salary after tax, but the net salary after tax and after work-related expenses. So that includes anything like shirts that you have to wear for work, laundry, travel, train tickets, anything else that's like a work-related cost. So then you've got your net salary. You then divide that by the total number of hours that you do, averaged out. And it's not just your rotated hours. So it's not if you're rotated in to work as a 40-hour work week, it's that plus your commute time, plus time getting ready for work, like all of the time that you would have spent, that you wouldn't have spent if you weren't working that day, which suddenly becomes a lot more than a 10-hour day. It might become a 12-hour day because of all the extra stuff on either side of it. That is then your true hourly rate, and it's usually like pretty depressing. And so he says you then convert your true hourly rate into time every time you want to pay for something, every time you want to buy something. So if you want to buy a coffee, that's a let's say $6, and you say, okay, that's 45 minutes of my true salaried man hours, and you're like, oh, actually, I don't think it's worth 45 minutes. And so you then make a much more informed decision as to whether something is worth buying or not, based on a much truer reflection. And yes, it is certainly depressing to do, but it's much more realistic.
Yeah, I have to say, I love that way of thinking. That's how I choose my jobs. I had a job that was an hour away, but it paid $30,000 more than, it was like $30,000 or $40,000 more than my current job. And even working, say, 50 hours a week, calling that drive work, it still made significantly more sense to, say, take the other job.
Most people would just be like,
I'm a big fan.
I'll take it.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of calculating all of that so you can make the best decision. And at least so in the United States, we have to care about healthcare and stuff. So you can health insurance. So you can actually calculate how much value the health insurance a company provides versus if you use the government, like Obamacare website. So you can say, well, this company is offering me healthcare. Well, that's worth $6,000. So you can sort of rationally compare, are these benefits really that good? You can add your 401k, that's our retirement plan, that sometimes employers match. You can put all that stuff in so you can really make a good decision. I've had to turn down jobs because they wanted me to take like a very big pay cut. Even though they claimed the benefits were really that great, you could actually calculate that the benefits weren't that great. But I guess that kind of is just more into that, rational decision making. And I do like that you were able to convert that to time. I remember I was very against buying fast food because if it cost me $6, this was back when I was working at a clothing store, it cost me $6 for the meal. Well, I only made $7 that hour, and that was before tax. So I worked a whole hour just to pay for, a burger or something.
And then there's the other, like, if you were to really go, like, full clarity on this stuff, like, you've not only converted it to time, but also, like, what is the value besides satisfying hunger that you're getting from that burger? You're not getting much micronutrition from it. Is it moving you towards your physique goal? Maybe, if you're bulking or if you're wanting to gain muscle, but in most cases, so another metric that I would like to use, for example, is, and I've seen you've done something similar, is either grams of protein per penny, which you can then, it makes you look at fast food in a totally different way, and things like KFC then start bumping up the up the rank rather than other things, but also satiety value per penny or per calorie. And I think satiety value per calorie, the satiety index is a great thing to use for this, which is a series of it was a study done with a series of foods where they used 100 calories of white bread as the index. So that was 100. And then what they would do is give people a certain standardized number of calories of a load of different foods, and observe how much they ate throughout the rest of the day. So trying to get a metric for how full it made them feel and how much it blunted their appetite for the rest of the day. And so you've then got this scale of things on both ends of the spectrum and how satiating it is relative to white bread. So I think, from memory, the lowest thing on the satiety index was like a croissant or crisps or chips, as you call them in the States, and the highest thing was boiled potato. And what I find so interesting about that is that potato and chips and crisps are the same thing, but one of them is just in such a different form, and it can actually be at the opposite end of the satiety spectrum. So there's so many hacks like this that would improve someone's adherence to a diet or improve their success in a diet, such that last time I dieted down to sort of 7 or 8% body fat, I was very lean, but I was eating between 1 and 2 kilograms of cauliflower every day, which is probably insane to most people's perspective, but actually for me it hit that KPI. It was maximum satiety and maximum volume with minimum calories.
By the way, I'm super interested in this satiety index because I think I've heard of it. I guess I just never knew that someone actually did it. So I'd be curious if I could look at say that per dollar and seeing if there's any sort of value in, say, what foods are cheapest and very filling.
Well, I've published something in the British Association of Sports and Exercise Medicine about this, so I can send you the link to it if you're interested.
Yeah. For sure.
Cool. So, Michael, this has been an absolute whirlwind of a conversation because we've gone through how to apply these principles across so much in life, and hopefully anyone listening is now, if they were first skeptical, they're now convinced of the far-reaching benefits of approaching your life in this way.
Well, if we have a little bit more time, I can list out some tips that may instantly save some time.
Oh, let's do it.
Okay. So we talked about shoes per hour, and that's where we talked about the shoehorn. So I highly recommend that. We maybe touched on protein per second a little bit, but really just that some protein does expire. It kind of often requires cooking. So I kind of looked into that. And things like milk, beef jerky may be expensive, but it's, ready protein. And then if you have to cook food, putting, say, a lid on whatever you're cooking, that'll keep the heat inside. So just a little simple thermodynamic trick, but it'll make, say, water boil quicker. It'll make food cook quicker. So that increases your protein per second. Watching videos faster on Netflix or YouTube. So I don't know if you have ever sped up a video on YouTube, but you can watch, say, an hour video 10% faster in 54 minutes.
Man,
so
this is another thing that makes me think we are brothers from another mother here. I saw you recommended Video Speed Controller Chrome extension.
Yeah.
It's my favorite thing.
I love it. We're
I think
1.3 times speed.
Okay, see, for certain material, I think it depends on the material. For some, if it's very simple content, you can push it up to 3 times. I think any faster than that, it goes a bit garbled. But for dense content, sometimes maybe even 1.5 or 2 is a bit too fast to be able to fully process.
Yeah, I mean, we'll do 1.3 times speed on entertainment. We're just trying to enjoy. But as far as lectures and stuff, I'll blow through it. 3 times speed. Some other tips: water per second. So kind of a simple trick. So instead of drinking out of a small glass cup, which may only be 6 or 8 ounces of water, I have a 1 gallon water bottle. And it's non-trivial. You'll save let me get the right number. I think it's thousands of hours. Yeah. Okay. So this bottle compared to a 6-ounce cup will save you 1,500 hours in your lifetime. And that might sound kind of crazy, but humans actually have been dealing with water as a problem and transporting it forever. So the fact that we have it in our own lives today actually isn't that surprising. Airproofing your home. So I talked about checklists. I think that's a really powerful tool. But also for our shower, my wife likes it at a very certain temperature. So we found out what the temperature was, and then we bought a shower cran and just marked on the shower like how far over to push the handle. And that's really nice because it works every time. So you don't have to, mess with that. You don't have to test it. You just can go right in the water.
Nice.
I'm not sure how you feel about eating twice a day. So people call this intermittent fasting, but that potentially could save time if you're only using 2 bowls a day instead of 3 bowls a day, and similar principles.
So actually, Michael, yeah, I mean, this probably fits into one of your 7 forms of waste, but I guess with that you've got the washing up time of washing up 3 bowls rather than 2. But also the switching time, and I think this is most evident when you're working, say on a laptop, you're doing something, and then you get a text message, and then you switch and you start responding to the message, and then you get distracted by something else on your phone, and then you spend 5 minutes doing that, and then you switch back to the work, and you still need another 5 minutes to get some of that attention residue off your phone and back onto the work, and also to just get back into the groove of what you were doing. And that, multiplied by the number of distractions over 1 hour, just completely tanks your productivity. And it's probably the same with eating, that if you're having to eat 6 meals a day, each one pulls you out of your flow to the point where the total output for the day is just completely tanked.
Right. I mean, I'm a big fan of taking breaks. But when you have to do things just to satisfy your body, that definitely takes you out of that zone. But, by the way, so those are pretty much what I have. I mean, there's more on the website. We didn't really talk about money savings, but those are actually my most popular articles. But yeah, those are all on the website as well.
Oh, cool. Yeah, we'll include the link for that. So I suppose the things people can take away right now is get a big bottle of water, cook with a lid, use a microwave, mark the temperature that you have on a shower, and look at the key metrics that you want to optimize for within your process. Look at the non-value adding steps within your process. Have a contingency plan for anything that's for if something doesn't go to plan, so that you're not sat twiddling your thumbs. And I think is that pretty much it?
I mean, there's kind of always more in industrial engineering. I could talk about spaghetti diagrams. All right, I'll drop one more thing. All right, spaghetti diagram. So imagine you have a blank piece of paper and you draw, say, the shape of your house, and you want to see how you make the trip from your bed to the door to leave. Well, you put your pen down where you start on the bed, and you don't lift that pen up until you have left the house. So you kind of go through your process, drawing it down. At any point that you've pushed your pen back and forth, so you have lines that are overlapping, those are visually showing you waste. So, just another tool if you're trying to eliminate transportation waste.
That is cool, because especially with shopping, because I mean, the standard thing in a grocery store, isn't it? It's people go zigzagging through the store, but then they might go back and forth to different places. And this is one of the key reasons that I shop online, because I am so susceptible to just impulse buying rubbish food by being in the shop. And I get such FOMO with food, fear of missing out. Whereas if you're doing it online, you know what you need. You can even repeat the order from the previous time without having to look at anything. And it avoids both the time wasted in the shop and waiting in the queue and all that stuff, but also the temptation of buying things that are not necessary.
Yeah, when you save time, you're spending less time thinking about whatever you're, doing there. So even more benefits.
So, Michael, this has been a not only a very practical podcast, but also a bit of a philosophical reboot as well. And it's awesome to see. Something that was mentioned in a podcast last week was a guy called Chris Sparks from what's his website called? The Forcing Function. And he talks about, at the end, he's a pro poker player, and says at the end of the year, he looks at all of his processes, all of his habits, relationships, things that he's spending time, energy, and money on, and says, I get two choices with any of these now. I can either cut it out of my life or double down on it, and there's no in between. And so every year he ends up getting closer and closer to this kind of optimized point. The idea of that scares me, and I don't think everything can be doubled or nothing, but the principle is great, and it really does like force you to kind of pick something up, examine it, and say, should I throw this out, or should I really double in on this thing?
Yeah. I have to say, I think that's very interesting. If you like something, why not double it? I mean, I can see how scaling it doesn't always work, but I definitely find that's an interesting way to do things.
For sure. So, Michael, thank you for your time with this. I think this has been hugely valuable. And can you tell us how we can get in touch with you, how we can find out more about your content?
Yeah. EfficiencyIsEverything.com. Even if you just try to Google that, it'll get you there. And then my most popular article, even though it's a bit outdated, is my calorie per dollar. If you Google that, I got a bunch of different nutrients per dollar, protein per dollar, and for all the restaurants too, at least in the U.S., everything McDonald's, Taco Bell, KFC, all of that, the protein per dollar. So yeah, if you remember any of that and you Google it, you'll get to the website. And if you want to talk to me, my contact info's on the page.
Awesome. We will include all of this in the description on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, so you can check it out on there if you're listening. And if you're listening in the car, because that is another way to double down on your wasted time. Not double down, rather, on how to save on the wasted dead time from driving. Cool, Michael, it has been a pleasure. I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you so much for having me.